Messages for us tonight is the difference between arrogance or confidence. Now, we live in a world where all kinds of things are coming at us, and even things come from our own hearts that we don't really, I don't always know what completely motivates me. I don't know about you guys, but I think that I'm being motivated by good things, but am I really? It has come to my attention at times in my life where I have seen that my motivations weren't pure. It's also come to my knowledge at times that actually my motivations were pure in these other circumstances. But it really is a help to us if we know where someone's coming from and why. Okay? So that's why I say, is it arrogance or is it confidence? Now, let me tell you where I'm coming from in this, because it's a kind of a personal thing for me. First of all, you know me well, all of you. I am a confident person. I know where I'm going. I know I'm comfortable in who I am. I'm not arrogant about it, but I know where I'm at. You see, now a lot of people have made the mistake with me thinking that it's arrogance. It's not arrogant if I know where I'm going. It's not arrogant if I am secure in my faith in Jesus Christ. Okay. However, that said, I have seen at times when I have been arrogant. Okay. So I'm not sitting here saying, well, I'm never arrogant. Well, yes, I am. All of us are at various times. Okay. But the wisdom is to spot it. And when we do spot it, if it's in ourselves, to make the effort to root it out. If it's coming from someone else, to say, not having that. Okay? So it's an excellent insulation against the things that can beset us. If we don't know where a person is really coming from, we're doubly vulnerable, aren't we? You see? So it just helps to know. So now, first of all, the most important thing in understanding whether it's arrogance or confidence is actually motivation, isn't it? What is it that drives us? Motivation is behind each and every action we ever do. It's like in English grammar, when you're brought up, you're taught that no sentence is a complete sentence without an action word. Okay, even if it's a kind of a static action word, like the verb to be or to have, okay? These are kind of static, but it's not like, if I say run, okay, that's action, but there's something that motivates every action. Like, for instance, I just played the guitar. What motivated me to do that? You see, everything that we do. I went to church this morning. Why did I do that? Everything has a motivation. So, every action has a motivation or something that provoked the action. If our motivations are pure, but the outcome isn't satisfactory, it can be remedied. But the contrary is not true. Okay? So let me unpack this just a little bit. If I have a good and pure motivation, I can have the result not be what I wanted or not be really good, but we can always fix that. We can remedy it. We can work with it. We can modify it. We can look back and say, okay, maybe the mechanics of how I went through with the action were not commensurate with the situation, right? But if the motivations are not pure, nothing good can come from it, okay? Now, Jesus had a really wonderful way of saying this. He said, if the tree is good, it cannot make bad fruit. And if the tree is bad, it cannot make good fruit. Motivation is like the tree. Okay, that's kind of how I understand it. Now, our motivations are what drives us to take action. In my opinion, in my definition, a pure motivation is one that has others in mind. And it could include myself, but it definitely has others in mind. Whereas an impure motivation is something that I want purely for myself. And it doesn't matter no matter what happens to those around me. You see that? There is an impure motivation. And basically you can use the two words selfless and selfish to define those in a very simple way. So we got two scriptures tonight. We're going to go 2 Samuel 24 verses 1 to 10. and 2 Corinthians 11, 27 to 28, okay? As our jumping off place. Because what I want to do, I want to show you an example of a man who had an impure motivation. However, this particular man had a lot of pure motivations in his life, but this one wasn't. My dear grandmother, she had a way of explaining this to me. She says, Larry, there's good in the worst of you and bad in the best of you. Makes you think, doesn't it? It's pretty good, old grandma. With that Indiana Hoosier accent, huh? Okay, so let's start with 2 Samuel 24, 1 to 10, but let's just take it in bit-sized portions. Let's go verse 1 to 2 first. Now, remember, we're going on motivation. What motivates us? Okay, so verses 1 to 2 of 2 Samuel 24.
Again, the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he indicted David against them, saying, Go number Israel and Judah. So the king said to Joab, the commander of the army who was with him, Go through all the tribes of Israel from Dan to Beersheba and number the people, that I may know the number of the people.
Okay, now some observations here. We had a long discussion this morning about one very important point of these first 2 verses. Did God tell David to go and do this? My answer, after reading many different versions, is no, and it's also confirmed when we get to verse 10, which we won't do yet, but no, God did not tell David to number Israel. That's an important point. He said that the anger of the Lord burned against Israel. Now that is also inclusive of David. David is not separate from Israel. He's part of it, okay? And it incited David to say. Now what incited? The anger of the Lord, the apostasy in which they had fallen incited him to do something that he would not normally do. Now, the reason why I bring this up, because it's a very important point. Do you remember when there was a time when David was dancing before the Lord and bringing the Ark of the Covenant away from the Philistines, and he was dancing and the cart got upset, and Uzzah tried to steady the cart, and the anger of the Lord knocked him down. Okay, now, and then David was afraid of him that day, and the problem is there was a very precise prescription with how you transport the Ark of the Covenant. If you look back in Exodus, it is very, very clear that you had to have men carrying it through certain poles. It was very precise. And what David did is he put it on a cart pulled by a cow.
He copied the Philistines.
The idol worship of the day would have brought it in a cow.
Well, the Philistines had put it onto a cart in the first place.
Yeah.
But instead of doing it the prescribed way according to the law, he copied the way the Philistines had done it.
Let's go to the census that David's supposed to be taking, okay? Never in all of Israel's history were they called to do a census except when God told them to. Now, when you do a census, what are you doing? You are saying the people who belong to me. But wait a minute, this particular people, this peculiar people, belongs to the Lord. So if I'm going to take a census of them, that means they belong to me. Whereas if God calls for a census, he is saying they belong to me. Do you see the difference? So this is the reason why in the next few verses, we're going to see some interesting things. Now, the question that we must ask ourselves is this: what was David's motivation behind wanting a census? Now, myself as a teacher, I would say you plan your future. And part of the planning of my future is to see what effectives I have at my disposition. Okay, I want to know what's at my disposal. How many warriors do I have? The Philistines are beating at my borders all the time. I need to know what repelling forces are at my command, you see. Now that's a best case scenario, but I do not believe that is what he had in mind. I believe he wanted to know because it was a prideful situation. I believe that it was a bit of arrogance, and you'll see why as we unpack it. Let's go verses 3 and 4.
But Joab replied to the king, May the Lord your God multiply the troops 100 times over, and may the eyes of my lord the king see it.
But why does my lord the king want to do such a thing? The king's word, however, overruled Joab and the army commanders, so they left the king to enroll the fighting men of Israel.
Okay, now Joab and David have a very interesting relationship. They have a love-hate relationship because David knows that Joab is a very, very able leader. He's the commander of the army, and he is a leader of leaders. And he actually confronts David in many, many circumstances. David got very angry at Joab when he brought Abner back in from Israel, and Joab killed him. I'll leave you to look that up. But so he wanted to distance himself from Joab, but he needed Joab's leadership over the armed forces. Okay. Now another time when Joab confronted David was at the death of Absalom, when the forces of King David took back the kingdom from Absalom, his son, and Absalom was killed in the battle. But David was lamenting and weeping over his son, and Joab comes in and says, if you don't get out there, and if you don't show your love to this people, no one will stand with you ever again. So he forces David to come back out and do his duty as the king, despite his grief over the loss of his son. So this is another circumstance where Joab intervenes and says, why do you want to do this? This is stupid. Now, why again would Joab say this? We'll see it in just a moment. It'll become very clear why this is a really major issue. So let's go from, by the way, sometimes we need the people in our workplace who are a thorn in our sides. Sometimes. I remember there was once when I was teaching, and I was I was getting along in the syllabus. It was a GCSE syllabus for music, and one of the mothers was just being a pain in the backside. She was constantly needling me, but you know, I resented it and I didn't like it, and I thought she was a pain, but it did spur me on to do a really good job, and her daughter did get an A, and the other student did get an A star. So, you know, she was constantly pricking me. Are you at this point in the syllabus? Are you at this point? I wanted to stop her and say, will you shut your mouth? I know my job. Will you get out of my way and leave me to teach? Now, of course, you can't do that. You can't say that, you know, but I surely wanted to. And I have to look back on it and I say, you know, she was right. There were certain things I was skimming over that I shouldn't have. So she was necessary. She was my Joab. Sometimes your Joab can be your best friend. David did not see it as such, but there we go. So verses 5 to 8 now.
They crossed the Jordan and began from Aroah and the city that is in the middle of the valley towards Gad and on to Jazer. Then they came to Gilead and to Kadesh in the land of the Hittites. And they came to Dan, and from Dan they went around to Sidon and came to the fortress of Tyre and to all the cities of Hivitites and Canaanites. And they went out to the Negeb of Judah at Beersheba. So when they had gone through all the land, they came to Jerusalem at the end of 9 months and 20 days.
Okay, that's good. Now, one of the things that I marveled at was that how big the kingdom of Israel was at that time. If you remember when we were in Israel, that it's a sliver of a country. It's quite tiny, and in certain places it's only 9 miles wide. But here we're talking about Tyre and Sidon. We're talking well up north in the Midlands, in the middle part of Lebanon. Tyre was an island city, a very prosperous island city. Sidon was on the coast, but we're talking about, you know, a couple hundred miles north. Quite a good distance. There were a lot of pagan lands that were taken over in this circle of what was then Israel. Now the reason why I'm coming to this idea of Joab arguing, him and his commanders, none of them wanted to do this. It took them 9 months and 20 days. So what happens if you have the commander of your armies and all of the auxiliary and ancillary commanders that are busy with the census? They're not governing the troops. They're not keeping the armies on high alert. They're not ready for battle. They're not doing their jobs. So you have for nearly a year taken up without leadership of the armies. What happens to the armies when they have no leaders? Frightening things. Soldiers need leaders. When soldiers don't have leaders, they can turn feral real quick. So you have a very serious situation here that was provoked. And for what reason? You had all of the commanders and Joab who were well in control of those borders at the moment when David asked them to do, or ordered them to do this. Now, in the next verse, it says, and Joab gave the number of the registration of the people to the king. There were in Israel 800,000 valiant men who drew the sword, and the men of Judah were 500,000 men. So we have 1,300,000 battle-ready soldiers that were sitting there like this because they had no commanders. And what was the upside of it? Well, King David knew that he had 1,300,000 warriors at his beck and call. Pride. Can you see it? Pride, pride, pride. Let's read verse 10 now.
Now David's heart troubled him after he had numbered the people. So David said to the Lord, I have sinned greatly in what I have done. But now, O Lord, please take away the iniquity of your servant, for I have acted very foolishly.
Okay, now remember what I started with in verses 1 and 2. Did the Lord actually tell David to make a census of the soldiers? No. Obviously not. Otherwise, it would nullify verse 10. Verse 10 says that David's heart was troubled, and he said, I've sinned greatly against the Lord. So the fact that he was incited to do this meant that he had a weakness which motivated him to do this action. It was not the Lord's command. Okay? And then he saw how foolish it was. Now, this situation, we may think it's kind of, all he wanted to do is know how many people he had, but wait a minute. The motivation behind it for a leader is very, very important. We all know that an enterprise is only as strong as from the top down. I told you the story of the admiral under who I studied algebra at the military academy when I was about 13 years old, when he used to go out and weep sometimes after he would tell us the greatest war stories you ever heard, because he was in command of the entire Pacific Fleet during World War II against the Japanese. And I remember that time I was after school in his class, and it was just him and I went up to him and I said, Admiral, sir, why do you sometimes come back with red eyes? And it's obvious you've been weeping. Are you okay, sir? And he says, every order I gave, thousands of men died for 4 years, and I'll never get over it. And this is the weight of leadership. See, David has the kingdom. And if he has 1,300,000 soldiers who are under his care, how many people are we talking about that? Well, let's say we've got an average of 3 children and a wife. Okay, well, that means we got about 6 million people, don't we? I mean, I'm just taking a ballpark figure.
And that's just on the assumption that there is a leader, a soldier in every single family.
Yeah.
Well,
there's another point.
Yeah, because there are some families that will not have soldiers in them.
So
there's a lot more than that, perhaps.
So the thing is the sin was so serious of David because his motivation wasn't wrong, because he acted in arrogance and not confidence. You see, when he was battling Goliath, that was confidence. That was beautiful. When he looks up and he says, you are taunting the armies of the living God, who is going to sort you out one time and that's it. You see, there is a boldness and a confidence. But what was his confidence in? His confidence was in the Lord. Whereas in this situation, he's trying to build his confidence in his armies, you see. So now, I want to give us an example of someone whose motivations remained pure and the blessings of God that stayed on this man for his entire life, even when he was an enemy. So we'll go to 2 Corinthians 11, verses 27 and 26 to 28. Probably a good thing to do. 2 Corinthians 11, verses 26 to 28.
I can do this one.
Okay, darling.
In journeys, often in perils of water. This one?
Yeah, that's it. 26 to 28.
Of robbers, in perils of my own countrymen, in perils in the city, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, in perils among false brethren, in weariness and toil, in sleeplessness, often in hunger and thirst, in fastings, often in cold and nakedness, besides the other things which comes upon me daily, my deep concern for all the churches.
One more, please. 29.
Who is weak and I am not weak? Who is made to stumble and I do not burn with indignation?
Can you hear the love pouring out of that? Can you just feel the love that our blessed Apostle Paul has? He says, I have the responsibility for all the churches worldwide. Do you see? And his love for the people. He says, my concern for all the churches. And then the first couple of verses, he talks about all the things that he suffered. And I want to tell you something. Paul did not want to say that. I'm convinced in my heart that he did not want to say, listen, I've suffered for you guys. But there were unspiritual challenges to his authority, and he had to be an authority at this place at this time. Paul was absolutely God's linchpin, even more than Peter at this time. Now, notice one thing. The Apostle Paul actually was an enemy to Christianity for the first few years that we read about in the Bible. He even persecuted to death many, many people. Why? Why would God choose him? Because even in that, his motivations were pure. He wasn't doing it for himself. He thought he was right. He thought he was doing the right thing and exterminating horrible people who were leading people astray in the faith, in the Judaic faith. He thought that they were deceivers, that they were false, that they were greedy, and he sincerely believed that. This, I believe, is why God took him and said, no, I'm going to turn that purity of motivation, and I'm going to turn it for my goodness. You see, this is what happened with Judas. We've often asked ourselves the question, what happened with Judas? That's why his motivations were never pure. That's why Peter was also restored, because you notice that his motivations was always pure, even when he fell into arrogance or he fell into things that were outside of God's plan. He wanted to do right. He wanted to show pure love for the Savior, for his Jesus. He wanted to. He just didn't know how. And it was the same thing with poor Paul. He didn't know how. And then you get the situation that we talked about with David. Now, listen, 80%, 90% of his decisions were really good. And even God said, this is a man according to my own heart. He loves this David. He loves his manliness and his boldness and his confidence. But he could not bear his arrogance. And the arrogance that all of us have has to be taken out of us. So just to conclude this, just like the death of Uzzah and the Ark of the Covenant, David wasn't careful to follow the word of God in this circumstance. Who would benefit from the knowledge that David held as a result of this census? Who was going to benefit from this? Obviously, the answer was him. You see? Now, David did not display confidence in the Lord our God for the protection of the kingdom. He didn't pray before he did it either. He didn't say, Lord, would you like me to do this? Notice that before he wants to build the house of God, he wants to build the temple. So he prays over, he says, Lord, can I do this? And Nathan the priest comes to him and says, no, you're not going to do this. Your son will. But get everything ready, which he does expertly. Okay, he gets everything ready. So when Solomon comes in, he dances in and does it. He's got all the means right there at his fingertips. Why? King David made it happen. See? So the next thing is Paul's motivation was obviously for our benefit and for no other reason. Even when he was an enemy of Christianity, he was thinking he was doing it sincerely for his Jewish brothers and sisters. He was thinking of them. He wasn't thinking, I want to put them to death so I can be more powerful. Okay? Otherwise, you wouldn't have had that beautiful scripture in Philippians chapter 2 where he says, I was a Jew of Jews, a Benjamite, a Pharisee, the highest of the high, but I count it all as dung compared to the beautiful excellency of knowing Jesus Christ my Lord and his salvation and redemption. You see? So the thing is this confirms that we can be corrected if our motivations are pure. But if our motivations aren't pure, that thing we are trying to do, not going to work.
That's actually a point that David, when he realized what he had done that was wrong, he was ready to be corrected.
Yes, he was.
An arrogant man is not.
No.
Which is what you had with Saul. He didn't want to be corrected.
Good point.
He just wanted what he wanted, and that was all.
So basically, to sum all this up, you will always know an arrogance that's being displayed or an arrogant person in that they will always have everything pointing to themselves. It'll all and when you listen to their conversation, there'll be a me in there quite a lot. You see, and there'll be very, very little discourse that goes towards you. What about you? What are you about? No, it's me. You see, and all the attention is focused on me. And now, when you have confidence, you don't have to point to me. If I'm confident in who I am, I don't have to point to me.
That's so true.
I can put the energy on you, and I can put the questioning and the rapport on you, and interact very, very easily and very naturally because I'm not thinking of myself. So when we're going on in life, and especially in our churches, we have to notice arrogance and root it out, or have nothing to do with it. The minute we see arrogance, whenever that comes in, I'm not your man, I'm not your woman. No, thank you. We're not going there. Okay? Because the last thing that I put as a summary was pride or arrogance will always lead to defeat. It's a bomb ready to go off. While godly confidence will lead to victory. Now, the best example of that, I think, was with David and Goliath. How I love that story. He goes up, the little kid, little nipper, goes up to this big, 3 meter high giant with 6 fingers. He says, I'm going to sort you, mate. You're going to fall hard today. You're going to have a bad day because my God is good. So there we go. That's what I got for you today. Is that all right?